My name is Sharon Quinn. I'm 37 years old. And this is the story of how my sister stole the man I loved, shattered my world, and still had the audacity to mock me at our mother's funeral, until I turned around and called over my husband. It started 6 years ago, but even now, I can close my eyes and feel the knife twist. Back then, I was living in Denver, working as head of communications at a mid-sized organic food brand that was growing fast. My days were filled with branding strategies, PR launches, and investor meetings. It was intense. Exhausting. But it gave me purpose. And after years of hustling, I thought I had finally found balance, both in my career and in love. His name was Jacob Evans. Jake. I met him at a sustainability conference in Santa Fe. He wasn't loud or flashy like most of the venture bros there. No, Jake had a quiet confidence. The kind that makes you lean in without realizing. He listened like your words mattered. He smiled like he was in on a secret only the two of you shared. By the end of the weekend, he had my number. By the end of the month, he had my heart. I won't lie, I fell hard. And fast. He was attentive, gentle, smart. The kind of man who remembered I didn't like raw onions and that I cried during wildlife documentaries. We'd spend our weekends exploring mountain trails and cooking experimental dinners from Pinterest recipes. My mom, Lorraine, adored him. And though my father was more reserved, even he gave Jake the rare nod of approval. We dated for 17 months before Jake proposed, on my birthday, with the city lights of Boulder twinkling below us. The ring was antique, an emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "You deserve something timeless," he whispered. For the first time in my life, I thought, this is it. I'm safe. I asked my younger sister, Vanessa, to be my maid of honor. That decision would unravel everything. We were never close. Vanessa was 4 years younger, impulsive, magnetic, and used to getting what she wanted, especially if it once belonged to someone else. As kids, we were polar opposites. I was the achiever, she was the charmer. I earned things. She expected them. And still, our mother hoped one day we'd outgrow our rivalry. So when I got engaged, she was over the moon, not for me, I'd later realize, but for the opportunity it gave her. The first time Jake met Vanessa, I remember she wore this slinky red dress that clung too tight for a family dinner. She hugged him just a little too long. Laughed a little too loud. I brushed it off. She was always dramatic. But soon, she inserted herself into the wedding planning with obsessive energy. Just trying to help, she'd say, showing up to floral appointments, emailing me ideas at 2 a.m., calling Jake directly about the cake. My mom said it was sweet. I said it was weird. But I ignored the knot in my stomach. Then Jake started pulling away. He canceled dates. Missed dress fittings. Became curt on the phone. When I'd ask, he blamed work. Startups were demanding, he said. Stressful. I understood. I wanted to be supportive. Until I found her bracelet in his car. A silver charm with a lavender gemstone. Vanessa's favorite color. I knew it was hers, I'd seen her wear it since college. When I confronted Jake, he didn't even flinch. She probably dropped it when I gave her a ride, he said, breezily. Her car was in the shop. Everything inside me wanted to scream. But I didn't. Not yet. It wasn't until I showed up at his office, unannounced, with 2 coffees and his favorite sandwich, that I saw it. Them. Jake. Standing too close. His hand on her waist. And Vanessa, laughing, leaning into him like a woman completely at home. I stood there, frozen, watching the illusion of my life collapse in real time. They didn't even try to lie. Just stood there like guilty children, lips pressed thin, eyes full of panic. Vanessa opened her mouth to explain, but I stopped her with a look. Don't, I said, voice razor sharp. Don't insult me with a script you've probably rehearsed. I placed the coffee down, took off my ring, and walked out. That night, I didn't cry. Not immediately. I sat in silence for hours, staring at nothing. The ache in my chest was hollow, like someone had scooped out my soul and left only echoes behind. The next week, I quit my job, packed 2 suitcases, and disappeared. I sent one text to my mother, "I'm leaving. Please don't ask where. I'll be okay." She didn't reply with questions. Just one sentence, "I understand. I love you." I moved to Minneapolis under a new contract with our company's parent brand. Started over in a small 1-bedroom apartment with no memories attached. I changed my number. Deleted Instagram. Cut out everyone who had ever known me and Jake as Sharon and Jake. And for 6 years, I lived like a ghost. Quiet. Productive. Healing, one slow, excruciating inch at a time. Until the phone call came, "Mom's gone. The funeral's in Portland." And there she was on the guest list, Vanessa Hayes. Her name printed so clean, so normal. Like she hadn't torn a family in half. I didn't plan anything. I didn't imagine confrontation. But when that chapel door creaked open and Vanessa stepped in, designer heels clicking, Jake in tow, looking thinner, haunted, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about pain. This was about showing them, and myself, that I had survived. And they were still stuck in the ruins they built. The moment Vanessa and Jake walked into the chapel, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stood beside my father at the front, one hand looped through his arm, the other resting quietly over my heart. I didn't turn around at first, I didn't need to. The hush that spread across the small chapel was all the confirmation I needed. But then I did. Slowly. Vanessa's hair was curled to perfection, not a strand out of place. Her makeup was camera-ready, and her eyes were hidden behind a pair of oversized black sunglasses like she was attending a red carpet event, not our mother's funeral. And Jake, he looked like a ghost. Not the man I remembered. His once proud posture now slightly hunched, his suit wrinkled at the cuffs. He spotted me and froze. Vanessa tugged his arm forward. I turned away and whispered to my father, "I'll sit up front with you. Anyone looking for redemption can do it from the back." He gave a small nod, lips pressed tightly, but I saw the tension in his jaw loosen just slightly. Like he'd waited years to see me reclaim my place, not just in that room, but in our family. As the service began, I focused on the stained glass window above the altar, the light filtering through like soft forgiveness. I didn't look back. Not until I heard Vanessa whisper, loud enough for the pew behind her to hear. "Still alone after all these years, huh? Guess some things never change." I felt the people around us stiffen. I didn't respond at first. But I knew the silence would only feed her. So I turned, just enough for my voice to carry. "Still pretending to be a size 4 after all these years? Guess some delusions never die." Gasps and awkward coughs rippled through the chapel. Vanessa's face reddened beneath her perfect foundation. Jake looked at the floor. My father exhaled, barely concealing the grin that pulled at the edge of his mouth. But I wasn't done. I reached out and took my husband's hand. Julian Foster. The man sitting silently beside me in a tailored navy suit, his expression calm, composed, and quietly protective. I turned toward Vanessa and said, just loud enough to be heard, "Julian, meet your sister-in-law. Vanessa Hayes." Julian offered a polite nod and extended his hand. "Nice to see you again, Vanessa." She blinked. Confused. "Again?" Julian tilted his head. "San Diego. 2016, you were with Jake at the Tech Investment Summit. I was the rep from Foster Capital. The one who withdrew that $1 million deal from Jake's company after the due diligence red flags." Jake's head shot up. Vanessa's lips parted, then froze. And then I saw it, the exact moment it clicked. Julian Foster. The name Jake never dared utter after that deal vanished. The cold investor, the shark who pulled the rug from under him just as his company was gaining traction. I had heard Jake complain about that investor in the months following our breakup, never realizing it was the man I'd later fall in love with and marry. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who saved me had once crushed the man who broke me. I linked my arm through Julian's again and smiled. There was no gloating in my chest, only peace. I didn't come to the funeral for a showdown. I came to say goodbye to my mother. Still, it felt like closure had finally arrived. The service continued. I stood to give the eulogy, the one my mother had asked me to prepare before she passed. My voice trembled only once, when I spoke about her hands, how they always knew how to comfort, whether it was a scraped knee or a shattered heart. She never chose sides, I said. Even when it hurt her to stay neutral. She just hoped that time, and love, would guide her daughters back to each other. When I sat down, Julian placed a hand over mine. Vanessa didn't meet my eyes. But as we exited to the garden for the farewell reception, she suddenly stepped forward. Took the microphone. Her hand was shaking. I know this isn't the time, she began, her voice raw, but Mom used to say something to me when I was little. That people who hurt others don't always win. That sometimes, you realize too late what you've truly lost. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. Today, I think I finally understand what she meant. It was a short speech. No apology. No grand confession. But her voice cracked near the end, not out of performance, but something real. Regret, maybe. Or exhaustion from years of pretending. Afterward, I saw Jake standing near the hedges, staring into the distance like he didn't know where he belonged anymore. Julian and I walked past them, arm in arm, without a word. My father gave me a long hug before we left. She'd be proud of you, he whispered. Not just for surviving, but for coming back whole. That night, we stayed in the guest bedroom at my childhood home. Julian made tea while I sat in the kitchen and flipped through old family photo albums. There was a picture of Vanessa and me at Trillium Lake, maybe 10 or 11 years old, holding a frog we'd caught together. We were laughing. I didn't cry. But I felt something release. Like I'd stopped holding my breath after years of being underwater. The next morning, as I packed our bags, the doorbell rang. I peeked through the curtain and froze. Vanessa. No makeup. No husband. Just jeans, a gray sweater, and eyes rimmed with red. I opened the door without a word. She stepped in, slowly, like someone entering sacred ground. I don't know why I came, she said. But I couldn't leave without saying something. I walked into the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea, no sugar, no milk. Just how she liked it. I didn't ask her to sit. But she did. I left the house this morning, she said quietly. Jake doesn't know where I am. And I don't want him to. I didn't respond. Not yet. Vanessa looked around the kitchen like it was a museum exhibit of our childhood. I hated this room, she said suddenly. Because Mom always let you do the important stuff. I just cracked the eggs. I didn't laugh. But I understood. She lifted the teacup. Hands trembling. I'm not here for forgiveness, she said. I just want you to know. I know what I did. And I'll carry it. The silence between us was heavy. But it wasn't hostile. I poured more hot water into the pot, then added something small to her new cup, a slice of lemon. The way she used to like it as a kid. Vanessa's eyes welled again. But she smiled. A real one. In that moment, I saw not a rival, but a woman worn thin, humbled, and finally, maybe, starting over. No apology could undo the damage. But honesty, that was something. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to begin again. The morning after Vanessa came to see me, I returned to Minneapolis with a strange mix of emotions. Not peace, not anger, something in between. Something quieter. Julian met me at the airport, pulling me into a long, steady hug, the kind that said, "I've got you, no matter what came back with you." I didn't tell him everything Vanessa said right away. I didn't need to. He just poured me a cup of chamomile, tucked my hair behind my ear, and turned on the heater in the car without saying a word. That's how I knew I was finally home, not because I'd returned to a city or an apartment, but because I'd built a life that didn't require me to explain my pain every time it reappeared. Life resumed. We fell back into our routines. He cooked on weekends. I rearranged furniture like I always did when something inside me felt restless. And yet, something subtle had shifted. One evening, as I folded laundry in the living room, Julian walked in, hesitating by the doorframe. "You're quieter," he said gently. "Since you got back." "I saw a version of my sister I never thought I'd see," I replied. "Not the one who lied to me. Not the one who wore betrayal like perfume. Just a woman. Tired. Ashamed. And trying." He walked over and wrapped his arms around me from behind. That must have been harder than anger. It was. Because forgiveness asks more from you than revenge ever will. And I wasn't there yet. But I was standing in its shadow now. 3 weeks later, I noticed I was late. My period, which ran like clockwork, didn't come. A week passed. Then another. Julian didn't say anything, but I could see the hope rising behind his eyes. "Maybe we should test," he finally said one morning, handing me a paper bag with a pharmacy logo. "Just to ease your mind." We sat on the bathroom floor together, backs against the tub, staring at the little plastic stick between us. And then, 2 pink lines. I didn't scream. I didn't laugh. I just let the tears fall. Quietly. Steadily. As Julian pressed his forehead to mine and whispered, "We're going to be a family, Sharon. You're going to be a mom." For years I'd convinced myself that joy like this belonged to other people. That after the heartbreak and humiliation I'd endured, I wasn't meant to hold something so tender. But there it was, growing inside me. We told my father on a video call that same night. He wept, his face crumpling like the news had unlocked something in him that had been shut off since my mother passed. "If your mom knew," he whispered, choking on his own words. "She'd throw a whole parade in your honor." I believed she knew. I also told Vanessa. Not right away. I waited until I had my first scan, until I saw the flutter of that tiny heartbeat on the screen and felt a calmness take root in my body like a growing tree. Then I texted her, "Thought you might want to know. I'm pregnant." No reply came for 3 days. But then a message popped up, "If mom could see you now, she'd say, 'Told you my girl would bloom again.'" It wasn't much. But it was enough. Vanessa stayed in Portland. After the funeral, she quietly filed for divorce. She moved out of the 3-story house on Elmwood Drive and rented a 2-bedroom apartment near the music school where our mom used to teach. I heard from my aunt that Jake didn't fight her. That he signed the papers without protest. No begging, no theatrics. He didn't have the energy anymore. Vanessa took a job doing marketing for an independent bookstore. Modest, unglamorous work by her old standards, but real. She no longer posted filtered vacation selfies or designer handbags online. In fact, she deleted all her social media. We started exchanging texts every couple weeks, mostly about mom's recipes, or flowers blooming in her old garden. It was slow. Careful. Like picking your way across a frozen lake, unsure if the next step would crack the surface. And yet, she never tried to justify the past. Never pushed for closeness. She only responded to what I offered, never asking for more. One evening, I sent her a photo from the nursery Julian and I had just painted, a soft sage green with a shelf shaped like a cloud. Her reply came hours later, "That shelf, it looks like the one Mom had in our room growing up." I hadn't even remembered. But when I looked again, she was right. It was almost identical. A tiny echo from our childhood, now hanging in a room that would soon carry the next chapter of our family. That's when I realized something: maybe healing isn't always loud. Maybe it doesn't require a dramatic showdown or an apology screamed across a courtroom. Sometimes, healing is a soft picture. A shelf. A baby on the way. And a sister who no longer wants to win, just to exist without pretending. One Sunday morning, I walked out into the backyard, now dusted with the first snow of the season. Julian had built a small shed for me, part reading nook, part writing retreat, a space to breathe, to reflect. I sat in there for hours that day, writing again. Not to escape the pain, but to remember it properly. To tell the story, not just of betrayal, but of rebuilding. Of how I had once been shattered by the people closest to me, and yet still found a way to grow something beautiful from the rubble. I didn't write Jake's name. Not once. Because this story? It isn't about him anymore. Winter in Minneapolis deepened. Snow blanketed everything in quiet, muffled stillness, and with each passing day, I felt my body changing. So did my life. Julian took to reading baby books aloud while I curled up next to him on the couch, my head on his shoulder, our hands resting over the soft swell of my belly. There was something reverent about those nights, like we were weaving a new story together, one soft word at a time. One evening, after brushing snow off the windowsill of my writing shed, I sat with a mug of warm milk and reread the letter I had once written to my mother during my first year in Minneapolis. I had mailed it without expectation, not even sure she'd keep it. But Vanessa had said she did. She said Mom kept every card, every scribbled note, in a little wooden box tucked away in her closet. Even the ones from before things fell apart, and especially the ones after. That memory stuck with me like a melody. It played softly in my heart whenever doubt crept in. Doubt that maybe I was wrong to open the door when Vanessa showed up. Wrong to listen. Wrong to leave space for someone who once caused me so much pain. But then I'd look at the shelf Julian built in the nursery. Or the ultrasound pinned to the fridge. And I'd know, forgiveness wasn't a gift to her. It was a gift to myself, the gift of not carrying that heavy stone of hatred anymore. Then one snowy Saturday afternoon, Vanessa called. Not texted, called. I stared at the screen for a second, uncertain, before I picked up. Her voice was low, careful, like she was tiptoeing over glass. I didn't know if I should call. I didn't want to interrupt anything, she began. It's fine, I said softly. I've got time. She let out a breath, then said, I spoke to Mom's old friend, Mrs. Delaney. She was clearing out the church storage closet and found a box labeled Lorraine's choir things. Thought maybe you'd want to go through it. I paused. That choir closet had been our mother's happy place. Every Sunday morning, she'd lead practice, humming while she set out sheet music and tuning forks. That box could hold more than papers, it could hold pieces of her no one else thought to save. I'll come down next weekend, I said. You will? Vanessa asked, the surprise clear in her voice. I will. For Mom. The following Friday, I packed a small bag, bundled up in layers, and boarded a short flight to Portland. Julian kissed my forehead and rubbed my belly before I left. Call me if you need anything, he said. I'll be fine, I replied. And I meant it. This time, I wasn't running from anything. I was walking toward closure, slowly, steadily. Vanessa picked me up from the airport in a small white sedan. No luxury car. No designer sunglasses. Just her, in a wool coat and boots with scuffed heels. You look, she started. Pregnant? I finished, with a wry smile. She laughed, not mockingly, but the kind of laugh that said she didn't know how to act around someone she'd once wronged. And yet, she was trying. The drive to the church was quiet, but not tense. Familiar buildings slid past the windows. Old coffee shops, frozen playgrounds, the corner bakery our mother used to visit every Thursday. When we reached the church, Mrs. Delaney greeted us warmly and handed over the dusty cardboard box. We carried it to a side room and opened it together, kneeling on the carpet like we were kids opening a treasure chest. Inside were folders of old music sheets, black and white photos from church picnics, and a small velvet pouch. Vanessa pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside was our mother's locket, the one she wore every Sunday without fail. It had 2 tiny photos inside, one of me at age 5, holding a stuffed bear, and one of Vanessa at 7, flashing a gap-toothed grin. We stared at it in silence. "She never took this off," Vanessa whispered. "Not even when she was in the hospital." "She kept us close, even when we didn't keep each other," I replied. It was the kind of moment that didn't need more words. We finished sorting through the box and carefully repacked it, deciding we'd take it to our father's house and create a memory corner for her. As we drove through the slushy streets, Vanessa asked if I wanted to stop for lunch. There was a small diner near the river that Mom used to love. I hesitated, but then nodded. We sat at a booth by the window, steam curling up from mugs of herbal tea. She didn't order food. I got a grilled cheese and tomato soup, my old comfort combo. "I signed the final divorce papers last week," she said suddenly. I looked up. Her hands were flat on the table, fingers tense. "He didn't fight it. He barely said anything," she continued. "Honestly, it was a relief. I didn't say he wasn't worth the fight. I didn't say I tried to warn you. I just listened. Jake always blamed everyone else," she said. "Investors, timing, me. He burned through his second startup's capital like it was monopoly money. At some point, I started waking up and not recognizing myself. Why didn't you leave sooner?" "I was ashamed," she admitted. "Ashamed that I'd ruined your life, for someone who didn't even know how to love me without controlling me." That honesty, that raw, aching honesty, was the closest thing to redemption I'd ever heard from her. "I didn't just lose you, Sharon. I lost who I was. Or who I thought I was." I leaned back. Looked at her. Not as my betrayer, but as a woman trying, like me, to crawl out of a life she no longer recognized. And something in me softened. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded photo, one Julian had taken of me standing by the nursery window, sunlight hitting my belly, a look of quiet awe on my face. I slid it across the table. Vanessa picked it up and smiled through glassy eyes. "You look like Mom," she said. "Not just in your face. In your strength." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. She taught me how to bend without breaking. We walked back to the car in silence, but something had shifted again. A tiny bridge had formed, not sturdy, not finished, but enough to take one careful step forward. When she dropped me off at my father's house, Vanessa hugged me. Gently. No theatrics. No expectations. Just warmth. And I hugged her back. Not because I forgot, but because, for the first time, I believed we might survive the memory. That night at my father's house, the old walls seemed warmer than I remembered. Maybe it was the soft hum of the heater. Or the faint scent of cinnamon and dust. Or maybe it was simply that, for the first time in over a decade, peace had entered that space again. I sat with him in the living room, sorting through more of my mother's things, old recipe cards in her careful handwriting, the pressed flowers she once saved between the pages of Psalms, and a dusty VHS tape labeled Christmas '98. "Want to watch it?" he asked. I nodded. The footage was grainy and flickering, but there we were, me at 11, trying to frost a lopsided gingerbread house, and Vanessa at 7, sneaking gumdrops off the roof and giggling until she fell off her stool. In the background, Mom's voice was warm, steady, laughing even when we bickered. We watched in silence, letting the past flicker on the screen like an old memory lantern. When the tape ended, my father turned to me and said, "She prayed for this, you know." "For what?" "For you girls to find your way back. She always believed that love didn't die, it just waited." I wiped my cheek before the tear could fall. "She was better than both of us put together." "She still is," he whispered, tapping his chest. "Right here." I left Portland the next morning, hugged Vanessa briefly at the airport, and promised to call before the baby arrived. Back in Minneapolis, the nursery was almost complete. Julian had installed floating shelves, soft lighting, and even a mobile of stars and clouds that gently turned with the faintest breeze. "You seem lighter," he said one evening, his hand resting over mine as we lay in bed. "I think I finally put that chapter to rest," I replied. "Not because it vanished, but because I stopped letting it define me." He nodded and kissed my forehead. "That's why you're going to be an amazing mother." A month later, the baby shower arrived. We kept it small, just a few close friends, a couple coworkers, and Eleanor from HR, who'd become something like a quiet godmother over the years. The cake was lemon lavender. The games were awkward but sweet. And the laughter felt real, not performative. Near the end of the day, someone knocked on the door. I opened it. Vanessa. She stood there, clutching a small wrapped box, cheeks flushed from the cold. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said quickly. "I don't want to make it weird." Julian appeared behind me. "It's not weird," he said kindly. "It's family." Vanessa stepped in, uncertain, until Eleanor came up and hugged her. "Glad you made it," she said. And somehow, that simple gesture made everything easier. Vanessa didn't monopolize the conversation. She didn't try to be the center of attention. She just existed in the room, quietly, thoughtfully. She even helped a friend load gifts into the car without being asked. When most of the guests had left, and the snow had begun to fall softly again, I sat beside her on the couch. She handed me the gift she brought. "Open it later," she said. "It's nothing fancy. But I hope it means something." Later that night, after Julian and I had stacked gifts and washed dishes, I unwrapped it. Inside was a small silver rattle, engraved with 3 words, "Born of Grace." And beneath it, a folded note. Handwritten. "Sharon. There are no words that can undo what I did. I know that. I carry that. But I also know now what it means to fall in love for the wrong reasons. To lose yourself chasing someone else's reflection of you. And to wake up one day surrounded by everything you thought you wanted, and feel completely alone. You were brave enough to leave. Brave enough to rebuild. And even braver to let me back in. Mom always said you had the kindest eyes. I think she saw what I couldn't. That your strength wasn't just in rising, but in rising without resentment. Thank you for letting me witness that. And thank you for not slamming the door forever. I'll never stop trying to be worthy of the space you gave me. Vanessa. I read the letter twice. Then folded it and placed it in the drawer beside the nursery crib, underneath the first onesie we ever bought and the hospital forms we were filling out. Not because I wanted to forget the past, but because I had decided where it belonged, not erased, but refiled. Not glorified, but forgiven. A week later, Julian and I went to our final prenatal appointment. The baby was healthy. Strong. Already in position. And on the way home, as he drove and the city lights blurred past the windshield, I reached over and squeezed his hand. "What if it's a girl?" I asked. "Then she'll have the strongest woman I know to guide her," he said. "And what if she has a sister one day?" He smiled. "Then we teach them what we learned the hard way. That love without honesty is hollow. And that real forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom." I nodded. And that what breaks us doesn't have to bury us. Outside, the snow began to fall again. But inside, everything felt warmer. The night before I gave birth, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly above me, counting each turn like it could steady the nervous rhythm of my thoughts. Julian was asleep beside me, one arm draped protectively over my belly. His breath was calm. Mine wasn't. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the enormity of what was coming. The quiet awareness that tomorrow, everything would change. So I did what I always did when something overwhelmed me, I wrote. I slipped out of bed, wrapped myself in a cardigan, and padded into the nursery, where the moonlight poured across the floor like a soft river. I sat in the rocking chair, pulled a small notebook from the shelf, and wrote a letter to my child. Dear little one. By the time you read this, I hope you'll already know who your mother is. Not just the woman who tucked you in or made your lunches or told you to put on sunscreen. But the woman who fell, who broke, who got back up again. You weren't born into a perfect family. But you were born into a true one. You'll hear stories someday, about betrayal, about hurt, about people who failed one another. But I hope you also hear about grace. And forgiveness. And what it means to choose love even after the worst parts of someone's heart have been exposed. I want you to know that your mother loved once and lost deeply. And then found the kind of love that helped her rediscover who she really was. You're not here because everything went right. You're here because I refused to let the wrong things define me. You are the proof that life blooms again. Love always. Mom. The next morning, contractions began just after sunrise. 12 hours later, I held my daughter in my arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a soft cry that sounded like a question, as if she were asking, is this world safe? And I whispered back, yes, baby girl. You're safe now. Julian wept. I wept. There was no grand announcement, no confetti, just the quiet joy of something long awaited arriving right on time. We named her Grace Lorraine Foster. Grace, for what saved me. Lorraine, for who raised me. The first call I made was to my father. He cried so hard, I could barely understand him. She's here, I told him. She's here and she's perfect. The second call was to Vanessa. I hesitated before dialing. But then I thought of everything we'd walked through. And I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Is she okay? She asked instantly, breathless. She's perfect, I said. And she has Mom's eyes. Vanessa didn't speak for a moment. Then, what's her name? Grace Lorraine. Her breath hitched. You gave her Mom's name? Of course I did. There was silence on the line, but it didn't feel awkward. Just full. Like words weren't big enough for what needed to be said. I'd like to meet her one day, Vanessa finally said. You will. 3 weeks later, Vanessa visited Minneapolis. No drama. No emotional breakdowns. Just her, a small stuffed elephant in hand, and a willingness to sit quietly on my couch while Grace napped in her bassinet. I don't expect to be Auntie of the Year, she said. I just want to be someone she can count on. Someday. I nodded. You're already on your way. That visit was short. But it didn't feel like a farewell. It felt like a beginning. Months passed. Spring arrived. The snow melted, the tulips I planted began to bloom, and Grace's laughter filled the house like sunlight. Sometimes, I'd sit on the back porch, watching Julian lift her into the air while she squealed with delight, and I'd think back to the girl I once was, collapsed on a kitchen floor, holding a bracelet that broke her world. If I could talk to her now, I'd tell her, hold on. Your pain isn't the end. It's just the storm before the bloom. I've come to believe we're all given two families in this life, the one we're born into, and the one we fight to rebuild when the first one breaks us. And if you're lucky, you get a chance to make peace with both. Vanessa and I aren't sisters in the storybook sense. We're not braided hair, Sunday brunch, matching jewelry close. But we're present. Respectful. We check in. We remember birthdays. We send each other photos of old recipes, blooming flowers, handwritten notes. And sometimes, that's enough. I still keep the letter she wrote in the nursery drawer, right next to the silver rattle engraved with the words born of grace. Because that's what this story is, in the end. Not a story of revenge. Not even a story of justice. It's a story of resilience. Of womanhood. Of standing back up when everything tried to bury you. Of turning betrayal into fuel, not for fury, but for rebirth. You don't always get to choose how your story begins. But you always get to choose how it ends. And mine? It ends with me sitting in a quiet house, cradling my daughter, smiling at the sound of my husband making dinner in the kitchen. It ends with peace. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is living a life that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. What do you think of Sharon's journey? Would you have made the same choices she did? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if her story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us for more powerful stories.